Welcome to Intro to Mojolicious. My name is Glenn Hinkle, and I will be giving you an overview of what Mojolicious has to offer. First off, I want to say that Mojolicious is a full framework. It is not a micro framework. It can be used for small or large apps or anywhere in between. It is a full web toolkit, meaning it has both a client and a server aspect to it, and they both share a similar core. There are no dependencies. You do not have to install any other CPAN modules other than Mojolicious to get up and running. There are some optional dependencies. If you want to use SSL directly or some other features, then you would have to install them, but you don't have to install them to get running. You just need the one module. There's always an attempt by the Mojolicious team to keep it bleeding edge. For example, every draft up to the final spec of WebSockets, Mojolicious had an implementation even before any of the browsers supported it. If you've been paying attention to the gossip on the web, you know that Node.js is the latest hipness, the cool thing to use, partially because it's non-blocking and based off of events. Mojolicious is also non-blocking and based off of events. There's always an attempt to keep it pretty, whether it's the API or the presentation of the website, even the documentation. It's always going to be pretty. It's a big focus of anything to do with Mojolicious. But most of all, and the whole reason that Mojolicious was started in the first place is it's supposed to be fun. If you're not enjoying making your web apps, then why bother? All right, so first I want to go over a little bit about the client, also known as Mojo User Agent. So the basic purpose of any user agent is to get responses from the web. This just gets the content of Mojolicious, the website, and prints out the body. Mojo User Agent does more than that, though, in that it parses the document for you, so you can find things using CSS Selectors. If any of you are not familiar with CSS Selectors, it just lets you find or get a specific part of the HTML document to work with. This string, for example, will select just that list element from the Mojolicious website. Now that's HTML. You can also do that with JSON. This example gets a response from the Twitter API. Normally, you just get back a string. But User Agent also parses it for you, so you can access it using, or just like any other Perl data structure. So here you would get that specific part of the JSON document. Now this is super cool, but it still requires an element of hard coding the structure of the JSON document into your code, which can be a little cumbersome. So you can use Json Pointers, which are pretty fantastic because you just have to make a string. Json Pointers are relatively unknown. Not that many people know about them, but once again, as soon as we found out about it, Mojolicious has an implementation. Now let's say we take this user agent script that we've been looking at, and instead of printing out the content, just assign it to a variable. Assign it to a variable. Good. All right. Now, if we take this little snippet of code and we drop it directly into some arbitrarily large code base. Now, if someone gave this to you and said, I want to know what's going on with the script, or something's wrong with it, figure it out. First, you would have to find out where it is. And if it's a complicated code base, it can be cumbersome, if not just really annoying. So if you were to execute this from the command line and you use the Mojo User Agent Debug environment variable, you could see exactly what was going on. It'll print to standard out the full transaction, the request, the response, and the whole body. This is popular in some other languages. I haven't seen it a lot in Perl, except with Mojo User Agent. It's very useful when you're just trying to figure out what is this doing. You don't even have to look at the code. You can see what the web request is doing. So pretty much everything that can be done with Mojo User Agent in a script can also be done from the command line. These two examples do the same thing as the previous examples, just directly from the command line, CSS Selectors and Json Pointers. It's super great for testing and just for basic utility. I haven't seen anything this useful in any of the languages that parses it and does all this for you, but Mojolicious has it. So that's a little bit about the client side, Mojo User Agent. There's a lot more that it does. It's by no means just a simple user agent. Any one of these topics could take an entire talk just by themselves. But as you start to use it and get more familiar with it, I encourage you to check out events, because you can hook your code directly into any part of the request, and it just changes the way that you code getting your web responses. So that's a little bit about the client side. Want to move on to the server. So we'll start with basics. This is a route. It's a very basic route. It would match, say, if you did a GET request from a browser, say domain.com, without any path information. And we also have placeholders. Placeholders would match, say, if you had domain.com/hello, and it would match that /hello and store it in that placeholder for you to work with later. Then there are relaxed placeholders, which is the same idea, but it can also capture URLs with dots. So it would take domain.com URL with dots, and it would match it and store it in that relaxed placeholder for you to work with later. And then there are wildcard placeholders. Same idea, except it can also match slashes. So if you had domain.com/captures/slashes, it would match it and store it in that wildcard placeholder. So those, there you go. So those are routes with your 3 types of placeholders. To show you how to use them, we're going to start with a Mojolicious Light application. Mojolicious Light app is one file, which means it's great for getting started and also for prototyping. But most importantly, all the functionality of Mojolicious is accessible within a Light application. It's called Light, not because it's light on functionality, but because it's very easy to get started with. So to generate a Light app, Mojo Generate Light app. It's very simple. You can also give it a name. And this, if you execute this from a command line, will give you a simple Light app. I'm not going to show you that though. I'm going to show you the absolute minimum it takes to create a Light app. So first, you use the module, then you choose the route, and you assign it to a subroutine. In this context, also called an action. And you start the app. Now, if we were to take this text and we save it to a file, say we name it hello, and execute it from the command line using the development server Morbo, execute Morbo, it would give us this response. There's development servers available at that URL, and if we request that from a browser, it'll give us our text, hello. Which you can see, it's pretty obvious what it does. It just renders the text hello to the browser. Now this is all well and good, but it's kind of useless. We need to define our document. We need to write HTML. We want to define exactly what it looks like. So we can render it to a template. We'll call it my template. Since Light apps are one file, we can just take that template and we can drop it right at the bottom of the file. Now this does the exact same thing. It's just offset the text to the template. Now I talked about placeholders earlier, so we can take a placeholder and we can just drop one right in. You can see, just drop it right in. And if we take that placeholder, we can also just use it in the template, my placeholder, my placeholder. And if we, in the browser, request it with path information, it'll use that path part in the template. Now, just for any beginners who might not be familiar with this, it doesn't matter what text you're using. If you use whatever text, it'll also put it in the template. We can also pass a parameter. So in this case, year. And then we can use that in the template. Use it in the template. There you go. Very simple. Not hard to understand at all. And it would show up in the template just like that, just as you would expect. So this template we've been looking at is an EP template. EP stands for Embedded Perl. And they're very simple. There's not much to it. It's just Perl. You put the percent symbols on the front of it, and you can have the percent equal, which indicates you want to print out the value of the variable. And that's all there is to it. You don't really have to know much more than that. You can use the arrow percent syntax if you prefer that aesthetic, which is also necessary if you want to print out HTML on the same line. So let's create an EP template. We'll start with a basic HTML layout, boilerplate, and we'll drop some Perl in there. Iterate through a array reference and print out some list elements.
And this is all Mojolicious's own template syntax?
Yes, this is the EP templates included with Mojolicious, right? Yeah, you can use all of them. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah. So the point being with EP templates is that you can start out very simply. There's a lot more to it that can make your life easier, a lot more advanced features, but you don't need to know all that. You don't need to learn an entire template language to get started. All you have to do is know Perl, and you can add the complication only as you need it. And that's an important focus across Mojolicious, just to keep everything simple until you need it to not be simple. Now, no matter what template engine you're using, as he said, you can use template, other engines. Template Toolkit is a popular one, Xlate, whatever you want to use. You can use tag helpers. Tag helpers are a simpler way to write HTML. In this case, the benefit is marginal. It's much easier to write submit button, but it's about the same length. There are some tags that are much easier to work with. For example, the select tag. You don't have to worry about looping through all this text. You just write it in a declarative fashion with an array reference, and it's done. You don't have to worry about it. There are many tag helpers for some popular tags. Obviously, you can't have a tag helper for every tag. That would be infinite. So you can create tags using a specialized tag helper. This is the example we used earlier in the basic EP template. You can write that using the T tag helper. Very simple to read. I like to use tag helpers, or the tag helpers and T tag helpers, because it's easier to structure an HTML document and it's easier to read from a Perl perspective. Whether you want to use them or not, it's up to you. It depends on whether your designers or your HTML people know any Perl or not. If they don't, you may want to stay away from them, but you have the option available. This is an example of a snippet with tag helpers. You can see it's just Perl. If you know Perl, you can read it, and it's a very declarative way of writing your HTML. And you can mix and match it depending. In this case, the A tag is defined with the T helper, and it's actually easier to read if you use an A tag just directly. But you can mix and match it. It's kind of up to you. It depends on what your needs are. But the tools are available to make it much easier to read and to work with. All right, so there are a bunch of helpers available. These are just a few of them. But you're not limited to the existing set. You can very, very easily write your own. For example, this is a commonly used one. Anybody familiar with Perl will be able to guess what this does. In the Mojolicious code, it's defined essentially like this. Very, very simple. Just takes what you pass to it and returns a data dump of that variable. So if you were to take these 3 lines of code, this little snippet, and drop it into your Mojolicious Light app, maybe change it around, change the name, you have your own customized helper. And that's all there is to it. You can, I would actually recommend you take your application and you separate it into a bunch of little helpers. So you've got little helpers of single concerns that are very easy to read and very easy to follow, so you don't have these big clumps of code. And it's very easy to write them. That's all there is to it. Now that takes us past tag helpers and just brings us to regular helpers. This is the same helper, but it's used in the action. So if you were to have a basic action, you could just drop that right in there. And it would render the output of the number to the browser. Now this is great because any helper that you assign, or any helper that you create, is available in the main namespace as just like any other native subroutine from Mojolicious. You can't really tell the difference. All you just need to know is that it's defined, and it makes it very easy to separate your code. Now, helpers are intended to be written and shipped within one application. If you want to separate it from one application so you can use it in multiple, or you just want to distribute it separately, it just becomes a plugin. Now, there's no difference between helpers and plugins. It's just whether it's distributed separately or within the application. They're just as easy to write. The hardest part of writing a plugin is just figuring out how to upload to CPAN. But they're very, very simple. There are plenty of plugins available. Like any other web framework, there are more that are being written every day. There's a ton that are available. They're just as easy to install as any other CPAN module. You just execute it from the command line, and that's all there is to it. And they're just as easy to run once you have them installed. So if we take this one, and you just have a plugin, and that's it. You've used your plugin, and you can use it however it's documented to be used. There's really nothing to it. Whether it's a helper or a plugin, it's all the same. They're very easy to write. Now, plugins are generally, in my experience, considered a more advanced feature in frameworks. In Mojolicious, they're not really. There's no reason in the first week that you're using Mojolicious you couldn't be writing your own helpers and your own plugins and uploading them to CPAN. They're just that simple to write. All right, so I talked a little bit about Light. I want to go briefly into Mojolicious full apps. Mojolicious full apps are different from Light apps in that they, instead of one file, they are spread among several files, which makes them good for teams and for larger apps. But it has nothing to do with the functionality. It's easier to manage larger teams with multiple files. Instead of generating a Light app, we just generate an app and give it a name. And if you execute this from the command line, you of course will get your scaffolding. Now, if any of you are not familiar with this sort of scaffolding that is commonly used in frameworks, it can seem a little intimidating at first. You've got all this text and you're like, what does all this stuff do? It's not really that intimidating. You can see from the color coding here that it only generates a couple of files, or a few files. And they're separated by folder, so it's easy to identify exactly what they do. And there's not that much to it. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into full apps because everything that I'm talking about with Light apps can also be done with Mojolicious full apps. But I really want to drive in the point that you have the foundation of Mojolicious. And then on top of that, you like that? I did that for you. On top of that, you have a thin layer of Mojolicious Light, a very thin layer, as in that module is 68 lines of code that defines the interface that accesses everything else. So whether you choose to use Light or the full, underneath it's all the same stuff. It's all the same code. It's all the same tests. It's all the same stuff. So you can choose depending on what your needs are, but I don't know if I mentioned that it's all the same stuff, but it is. All right, so I mentioned that the client side has a command line aspect to it earlier. The server side also has a command line option. It's called Ojo. of course. Now, Ojo lets you execute small apps as Perl one-liners, which is super neat for testing and utility. If you were to, or this app does the same exact thing as this. And the first time you're seeing it, you might think it's a complicated string, but it's not really. It just defines the app A and gives it a route and renders text directly. And it's really great to use when you're just testing out things. You don't have to have a file and then change the file and then go back and forth. You can just execute directly from the command line over and over again. Now this is kind of neat. It's a really useful tool. But this starts a daemon, and that means you have to use a browser to find out how that responds. You don't actually even need to do that. Because this is based on, or this is Ojo, and it's also based on, and then it uses Light, and then underneath it uses Mojolicious, the full apps. It also incorporates things from Mojo, or Mojo User Agent. So you don't have to start the daemon. You can just get the request directly. And then it executes it. It does everything in the background, and it just works. And that's all using the underlying framework. You don't even have to know how it works. It just works. So with everything I've talked about, I mean, the fact that it has no dependencies, and it supports a lot of bleeding edge features, it's common to think that, you know, you've got all of this stuff, and you think it's a large code base, kind of unwieldy, but not really. It's under 10,000 lines of code for the whole thing. But even more importantly than that is the fact that there are around 17,000 lines of tests. About 9,000 unit tests in total. This is important because one of the coding guidelines of the project is that it's not a feature if there's no test. It's not added if there's not a test. That's why there's all kinds of tests for every single thing that's covered. I'm not going to say there's 100% coverage, but anything that's added needs to have a test. So let's say we have all these tests, these lines of code. How long does it take to install? If we execute this, it doesn't take very long at all. Now keep in mind, this is not just building. This is downloading everything you need for the framework. It's building it, and it's running all of those tests. And it happens in under a minute on a moderately fast computer. On my computer, it takes about 50 seconds. But this is important because this is a tenet of the framework. In the coding guidelines, it says that the installation has to take round about a minute. And that's just the way it's done. That's something that we have to keep to. If you want to be super hip, and I know you want to be super hip, I can tell, you can enable parallel tests with the harness_options environment variable, and it'll take that 50 seconds and drop it down to 15 seconds. So you can install the entire thing in 15 seconds. I think that's fantastic. I think it's fantastic for two reasons. Well, minimum two. First, you don't have to worry about whether it's going to install. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to have a problem. Am I going to have a problem deploying? It's going to install. There's only one module, and it takes 15 seconds to run all of the tests. That's awesome. But even more than that is it really focuses on, or it really showcases how much time and effort has been put into keeping the code base very clean and not bloated. If there's something that doesn't belong in the web framework or in any web framework, it's not included. In fact, there's a constant review of, do we need this particular feature in here? Can we take it out? Should it be separated? Does this belong in the web framework? And there have been some things that have said, no, we don't really need this. It requires a lot of code, and it doesn't provide that much benefit. So we take it out. And that's how we keep it down. This quick installation time actually happened by accident. It wasn't intended, but when we noticed it, it was like, oh, well, let's make that a tenant of it, and let's make sure we keep to that. So 15 seconds. I think that's awesome. That is, okay, so we have the framework installed now. Let's move on to deployment. If you want to be old school, you can go with CGI. It also supports any PSGI compliant server. And then there's the built-in daemon. The built-in daemon is important because there are two servers that are shipped with Mojolicious that are based on the daemon. There's Morbo, the development server. And what makes it a development server, if anybody's not familiar with it, is the fact that you can change your code, you can change your templates, and you don't have to worry about reloading the server as you're developing. It just picks up your changes automatically and it just works, which is invaluable when you're working in development. There is also the Hypnotoad. The Hypnotoad. So I have an explanation of Hypnotoad, but I just have to wait for this to be done, because you can't really pay attention to what I'm saying while the Hypnotoad is working. All right, we're done. So it's a hot code reloading production server. What that means is you have your code and your server's running, it's doing its thing. And say you change your code and you reload the server. All new requests will come in and they'll use the new code. All old requests will come in or all the old requests that are being used, all old requests that are currently being served will keep doing their thing in the old code. And when they're finished, the old code will go away and the new code will come, or the new code will be used on new requests. So it just keeps working. You don't have to worry about downtime. It just does its thing. It handles this with pre-forking and all different sorts of things. I'm not even going to go into that. You just need to know that it works. It's very easy to get started with. You just have to execute Hypnotoad from the command line and the name of the app. And that's it. You're up and running with Hypnotoad. To reload the code, it's magical. It's the same thing. It determines whether it's already running, and it just works, as I said. To stop it, it's very simple as well. S command line switch. Now, obviously, if you have your own production environment, you want to fine-tune this. You want to make sure that everything's running exactly as you want it. And there are tons of configuration options available. You can do them from the command line. You can do it with a configuration file, whatever. But as I said before, one of the points here is that you don't have to know all that to get started. You can just start very simply and add complication only as you need it. Now this Hypnotoad is run in production mode, which means you don't get any debug error messages out to the web requests when they come in if there's a problem with your app. And if there's a problem, you get your standard corporate error messages. Like you get your 404, obviously standard stuff. And if you have an error in your application, like a 500 internal server error, it lets you know that. And this is a feature you get. This is one of those features that you get. You don't have to install any modules for this. I want to point that out. Just saying. All right, so that's if you have your own server. When you're first starting out especially, figuring out how to write code, figuring out how the web works, figuring out how a web app works, figuring out how to get your own server up, it's complicated. When you get used to it, it's no big deal. Who cares? It's just a bunch of steps. You just do it. But it's very intimidating to get started at first, and it's just a lot to learn. So the easiest way to get started is, of course, you got to be super hip, and you have to deploy to the cloud. There's many different cloud services available. If a hosting company doesn't have a cloud service, they're not cool anymore. So I chose Heroku because it's the prettiest. And basically, you just sign up, and you install the deploy command. And once you do that, that's it. You're done with your setting up your environment. You no longer have to do those two steps again. You signed up, you install the deploy command. From there, you make your app, and you deploy. And you're done. You're now running with the website live on the web. Heroku will create a automatic name for you, so you probably want to give it your own name, and that's it. You're I'm not hiding anything here. Like, you're actually just running on the web. It's that easy to get started. You will by default have your app name, in this case, hellomojo.herokuapp.com. Heroku lets you assign your own domain name for free. So I used to run my own server, but why? I mean, if you need to, great. But I just have everything running on Heroku, and I have my own domain names, and I just use that, and there's really nothing else to it. I feel a little bad because I feel like I should explain more, but it's kind of simple. There are some, like, the deploy command will prompt you for your username and password for Heroku. It'll manage your authentication, so it'll manage your SSH keys. If you don't have an SSH key, I guess I am explaining it more. If you don't have an SSH key, it'll generate one for you. If you do have some SSH keys, it'll ask you to pick one, and then it'll handle all the uploading to Heroku and make sure that everything's all set. And it'll let you know what it's uploading. It'll let you know what it's scanning for, what files it's uploading, and then it'll tell you what it's doing, and then it'll give you the URL, and you're done. That's a process that the deploy command handles. When you get more into Heroku, you'll want to find out what the Heroku tools do and exactly how they work. But you don't need to know how it works. You start simply, and you add complication only as you need it. You sign up. You install the deploy command. You create your app, and you deploy. Hooray! You can move on to more important things like regex Unicode, which I didn't want to go see that talk, so I'm glad to be here. All right, so you checked out Mojolicious. You think it's awesome? Great. What's next? Where do you go from here? The first thing I recommend when you're learning Mojolicious is you check out the Mojo Casts. Mojo Casts are high production value screencasts. They are tutorials that last about anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the episode. And they're great for tutorials. They're also good for reference. Each section of each episode is separated by topic. And after you've watched them all through, you can go through and you can just click on each portion of the Mojo Cast, and it'll link you directly there. So you don't have to skim through the video. You can just go exactly where you want. Very accessible. They're also good for reference because you can bookmark those, and you can send them to other people, and it'll drop that person right into exactly what you want them to see. They don't have to worry about where in the video you go. Very accessible. There's also, on the mojocast.com website, there is a more resources link. It's just a link that it's an aggregation of links that are not necessarily collected anywhere else. If you're not constantly paying attention to the IRC channel and you don't necessarily know what's going on, what's the latest hitness in the Mojolicious community, you can just check out this menu every once in a while, and you can find out what the latest things are, and just useful things that you might want to know. Just check it every once in a while. All right, so after you watch the Mojo Cast, you should check out the guides. They're under the documentations on the link on the website. Now, if you go through and you read each one of these guides in the order that they're listed, it's important that you read them in order. You will be proficient in Mojolicious. I think that's important to note because you don't have to go searching all over the web. If you watch the Mojo Casts and you watch these in order, and you read these in order and absorb the information, obviously, that's really all there is to it. There's a clear path to go from absolute beginner to very good at Mojolicious. You can put it on your resume, and you should have no problem using it. There's just a clear path. The intent is to be very accessible to beginners and have a good reference point for advanced people as well. In addition to the guides, there is the Mojo example. It's a GitHub repo that has a light app and a full app side by side. And they both do exactly the same thing. So you can easily see how it works, and the differences between the two, but they do the exact same thing. And it's more than just a simple application. It's a complete application in that it uses a database, it uses the database class ORM, It has full test coverage for the web application. It has full test coverage for the Dibix class code. It even uses fixtures to test the Dibix class code so that it handles everything. You've got a complete application, and it's all ready for you to just check out. And some explanation is with it as well. But even better, of course, it's running live on Heroku. There's this deploy command. It's awesome. I don't know if you knew about it. I used it. Now this is awesome because you can look at the code on GitHub and you can navigate around the site, very simple site. There's a blog and photos. And you can see how everything works and how everything responds, and you don't even really need to download anything. You don't even need to have Perl running. You can just click around the web and learn Mojolicious. Again, there's a focus on accessibility. How can we make it more accessible? This is just another way. Of course, we have an IRC channel. Mojo on irc.perl.org, and the mailing list on Google Groups. Now, I want to go over one point about the IRC channel, is that it's a friendly place to be. If anybody is not familiar with IRC, or even if you are familiar with IRC, you know that it's not necessarily a friendly place to be, especially when you begin. When you first start out, you have all kinds of questions. Some of them are very obvious questions to other people, and some of them are not. Often you have people that think there are such thing as stupid questions. I don't think there's any stupid questions. There's just questions that the more advanced people don't understand because you haven't thought it through properly. And that's okay. You can feel free to come into the Mojolicious channel and ask whatever questions you want. Nobody will be mean to you. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter what someone's standing is in the Perl community. Nobody gets a pass from that. Everybody has to be nice. There is a... Thank you. There is a channel sheriff specifically appointed to make sure that that stays the case. And to do even more than that, like there's a lot of potential conflicts that can happen just based off of cultural differences. Every developer on the core team of Mojolicious is in a different country. So, and then you've got all these other countries coming in. There's a lot of potential there for conflicts, and that doesn't even add personality conflicts. So the channel sheriff there and everybody is there just to smooth over potential issues. And that's all there is to it, really. It's just a friendly place to be, and there's an attempt to make sure that it always stays that way. Everything I've talked about is listed on mojocast.com/YAPC. And that will be up, including the slides and a QuickTime slide file, which has all the super nifty animations, and all the resources like the deploy command, a direct link, parallel tests, and all these different links. That will be up in about 2 minutes after I finish this talk, when I can use the deploy command. And my name is Glenn Hinkle, also known as Tempire, and this, if you hadn't guessed, is or was Intro to Mojolicious. And I'm done. We have some time, so any questions? You, sir. Right. So the question was, well, actually, I don't understand your question. Did you? Well,
you said render my template, right?
Right.
That looks for a file name my template.
Oh, right. And I put it at the bottom of the file because it's a light app.
Yeah, or it could be its own file, right?
Yes. Mojolicious automatically checks the templates subdirectory to see if it's there. In Light, everything's included in the same, but if you don't have it in the same file, it'll check templates, and it'll essentially just work, but it starts with the file first. In a Mojolicious full app, it's all separated, so it would check the templates directory.
Well, could you put in there, so if you don't have the .html, it still looks for a .html,
Right.
You don't have that in the render
Right, right. It assumes that because it assumes EP by default. You can set I didn't show it here, but you can set the render engine to anything you want. Essentially, you just set an attribute to that template engine, to that object, whatever. So like template toolkit. A lot of people use template toolkit because it's easy for HTML people. And it would automatically search for whatever you told it to, but default .html.tt. Right, right.
I'm not cool. I'm not on the cloud.
It's
Clients who use Windows Server. Does it work on Windows?
of course, that's coming. Yes, it works on Windows. Not everything works on Windows.
Servers work on Windows.
Hypnotoad does not. Hypnotoad operates directly off of forking and some fancy tricks. But other than that, yeah, I mean, you can any server that runs on Windows, you can just put it directly in there. PSGI compliant, I mean, it'll just run, essentially.
Nothing just runs on Windows.
Well, you know, in trying to get that deploy command working with Windows, I'm with you. But the deploy command does work with Windows. Heroku service does not always work with Windows. But the deploy command does. So I'll leave it at that. Mojolicious? I'm pretty sure there was a vote, but I wasn't there for that. But that's what I heard. There was just a general vote. And originally, it was a lot more themed, like where it said app start. It used to be just shagadelic, which I think is awesome. Like, but right, it's better. But some people are bobo, and some people can't handle that kind of humor. There have been some people who said like we don't like the vomiting raptor, which I don't even understand what you're saying when you say that. Like, how could you not love rainbows? I don't know. But so I mean, you can change all that. Obviously, in a true corporate environment, you have some stodgy dude who doesn't want to see all that. You can change that. I mean, if you want to, whatever. That's cool. I'm not going to judge you.
Can you talk a little bit more about the database integrations?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Mojolicious is database agnostic, which is why I don't go into it much. It's really simple. Like, it's just a helper, which you saw how easy it was to define a helper, and you return the object, and you're done. Obviously, you can go a little bit deeper, and you can do like connection management. There are some plugins available for that. You can see how easy it is to use a plugin, and that's really all there is to it. It's not something that as I mentioned before, it's not something that the web framework tries to take control of because it's not the web framework's responsibility. It just keeps it separate. And I personally don't. A lot of people come in and they say like where's our connection helper, because they're used to other frameworks, some other frameworks that it's all integrated and you have to learn it. It's really not that simple. Once they see how simple it is, it's like, oh, I get it now. I want to go over one point. There have been a couple people who have come up to me and said, I love Mojo User Agent. I wish it was decoupled and distributed by itself. Which I can understand them coming from that perspective when you have other packages that rely on a lot of packages, which is totally fine, like whatever. 15 seconds to install. You have to install the whole framework for 15 seconds. It's just not that big of a deal, and it just requires a change of mindset. There's not that much to it. Both of them, both the user agent, the client side, and this is what I meant earlier when I said a full web toolkit, both the client and the server side share a same underlying core. The whole framework, client and server, is based on an event loop. It's all non-blocking. And you can do blocking requests, but it uses non-blocking concurrency to fake blocking. So whether you're talking about the user agent or the server, they're all using the same underlying event loop core, which is based on EV for any of you who care. And And that's one of the reasons. There was talk, because a lot of people asked that initially, do we want to decouple this? But we decided not to, because the maintenance cost was high. And if you had the client and the server side, you'd have to install this core. So you'd have 3 modules right off the bat that you would have to install, or at least 2 modules that you would have to install. And there's just not a whole lot of reason to do that, because 15 seconds, it's done. So that's it. Any other questions? Right. She commented that she came from the Java world and it's very similar to Grill. If Grill is awesome, then yes. I don't know anything about Grill. A lot of the things in this framework is very common across all frameworks, across all languages. Most of the hipness, Mark Allen mentioned the other day in his talk that most of the hipness that you see in these routes and everything all came from one source. They all came from Ruby Sinatra. And it was established that, hey, this is a good idea. So we use that and we build on top of it. Like things like the Mojo Get command, which is freaking fantastic. Building on top of the existing stuff that has already been proven. So like the scaffolding, it's very common. You see that scaffolding everywhere. All of this stuff you see pretty much everywhere. I'd say, at least in the Perl community, one of the things that makes, well, there's a lot of things that make it unique. One of the things that make it unique is that it's non-blocking and event-based. And you don't need to know that, but when you start to get into concurrency and non-blocking requests and non-blocking responses, it's there for you to use. It's pretty fantastic. You can hook into any part of the process on the server or the client side and just add your own code to it, which is a great way to do things because it automatically keeps your code separated in simple single concerns, as opposed to having this big block of code. It's a different mindset of how to do things. You don't have to do that, but it's available because of that event system underneath. It's using EV underneath, and because of that foundation of EV, it can use any event. There's some other ones that we're working on, just because they're there, why not? But underneath it all uses EV. If you don't have EV installed, it uses a pure Perl event loop. But if you do have EV installed, you have that much more control, and it's that much more efficient, obviously, because it's based in C. I think we're done. Thank you.